welcome back to another episode of Design Deconstructed. This is episode 18, where I'm going to be taking a look at the first opening chapters of our fourth expansion for Guild Wars 2, titled Secrets of the Obscure. And my name is Matthew Medina. I am an advanced narrative designer on the team here at ArenaNet, working on building their story content for Guild Wars 2 for this expansion. So let's get into talking about some setup stuff. First of all, this was a very different expansion for us in that it was our first take on what we were planning to do with a new content model, which is we were going to have smaller expansions that would then have follow-up releases on a regular basis that kind of complete the story and tell a whole cohesive tale from start to finish. So this expansion was smaller in scope initially, but that the size of that was not entirely known at the time. We knew we were going to do something smaller, but not to what degree. It was discussed whether it would be half of what a previous expansion might have been, and I think we ended up somewhere in between the size of Living World release, or Living World season rather, and what we had shipped in our previous three expansions. So something a bit different for us. We were learning as we went. What does that mean? To propose something like that, and then how to implement that. That was an interesting challenge for me because I am one of the only narrative designers at the studio working on story content for Guild Wars 2. And in this particular instance, I was the only implementer for Secrets of the Obscure story. I worked with all of the other team members in our narrative department to help me with the writing. They were chiefly responsible for helping craft the narrative and build the characters, and I was responsible for putting it all together and building it in the game using our development tools. Worked very closely with our open world designers as well. Our world team was focused on making the maps and the events that take place in the maps and telling the story of those. So there was a lot of close coordination with everybody, but I was the only implementer for the entirety of Secrets of the Obscure story, which is different than previous expansions. There's always been a team working on expansions, but again, because of the change to the scope and the size of what we were doing and the level of expertise that I have to build this content, it was known that we could probably get away with that given what we were trying to pull off with this. So that was the decision that we made fairly early on, is that I was going to be the only narrative designer working on this content. Which immediately raised questions about what is that scope? How do we do that with only one narrative designer? And so the first thing that we did was we worked very hand in hand and close with production to identify what is content with regards to story. There have been a lot of examples where we're a game that's been out for 10 years. So we've got personal story, we've got Living World seasons, we've got 3 expansions. We have a lot of data out there about what we have done in the past. And so, but we wanted to get a clearer sense of what can we do with the constraints that we have for this expansion. And we use a tool that we have internally at the studio, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of other studios. I think this came from the agile methodology of development, which is what we call t-shirt sizing. We break everything down that we build into small, medium, large, extra large, right? Like you would a t-shirt. And then that is condensed in, and so, okay, what does a small piece of story content look like? What does a medium? What's the difference between the two? How do you tell them apart? How does QA approach testing a small content drop versus a medium content piece, right? So the first thing we did was take another pass at clarifying what that meant. And so we put together documentation on here's what a small is, here's what a medium is, here's what a large is, and here's an extra large. And we really took it down to the brass tacks of like very, very fine detail of like this means a small, for example. We also ended up adding another piece to this that was maybe not in. You could call it extra small, but we called it pocket. So we called it pocket content, pocket like pocket instance or pocket story, because it's small enough to just feel like it's its own self-contained thing, and it's very, very low in scope. So for example, a pocket instance might be that you go into a room, there's only a few characters in there, there's a short bit of narrative to sort of set up what's going on, and then maybe there's some light interactivity, other things that you can do, read books or talk to people or do various things, and then that's it. That's a pocket thing. And then a small would be that, plus a small would have maybe a couple of small light combat encounters, but nothing too dramatic. And then a medium would be the small, then plus another layer of you've got larger sets of combat encounters. Maybe you have waves. Maybe you have different mechanics for building something out, and you have the player doing other things, and each of these things kind of breaks down into different sizes. And so that's what we did. We defined at a very granular level what each of those was, and then we went from there. And then once we had that size information, I could go to our design leads and say, here's the expansion. It has this many pieces, this many small, this many medium, this many large. And the other thing that helps us do is we can identify, okay, it takes X number of work hours, man hours, to build a large. It takes X number of man hours to build a small, and various things like that. It's not an exact science. These things can change, and oftentimes one of the things that we found is that scope. You may scope out a pocket instance or a pocket story set, but then over time it slowly grows into a small. We also have the opposite, where sometimes we're like, yeah, I scoped this as a medium, but really the mechanics here are stuff that we've already built before, so there's not a lot of overhead for me, so I'll knock it down to a small because it's actually feasible to do in a small amount of time. So that's what we did, and we came up with a plan. We built our scope out really, really tightly up front because, again, this was new to us. We wanted to make sure we weren't overshooting, in particular because for my own safety and sanity, my health and everything like that, my work-life balance, we wanted to make sure that I wasn't signing myself up for trouble later. And so we came up with a really good, realistic scope. I've been doing this since 1992 as a game developer, so I have a pretty good sense for what I can do, and a designer since 2009. So I have a pretty decent idea of what I can do and what I'm capable of. And so I was able to lay that out and say, this is what I know I can do. And I'm usually conservative when I do my own scoping because I know that it's better to come in early and say, you know what, here's a bunch of things we put on our stretch goal list. Let's start tackling those. Let's start making those a reality, because that's a better win. And as long as we are okay with, hey, even if that does take up the entire development cycle and we don't have time for stretch goals, we have to make sure that that is going to hit our quality bar. So that's a skill and a talent that I think as a team we have developed and worked hard on, and I'm definitely very cognizant of that when I'm starting off in pre-production for development. So that's kind of the high level thing. I also want to just call out here, as you may have may have picked up on, I'm going to try and do something a little different with this series, because one of the things that I think I have felt wasn't hitting the mark with this design deconstructed is I don't feel like I was giving quite enough insight or thought into what I was kind of relaying to you all in this venue, because you know very often what would end up happening is I'd load up the game and I'd have lots of things to say, and I think there was a lot of value in that, but I think it ended up coming across more like a director's commentary track on a on a movie that you like, right? Like they're watching the movie and they'll tell little anecdotes and stories and one-offs, but it's not really delving too deep. It's still pretty surface level sometimes. I mean, it's behind the scenes, and so you're getting a little bit of extra information, but it's not like too in the weeds. And I'm hoping that what I can do with this series is go a little deeper than that. So I'm going to do a little bit more explanation and setup, and I may stop playing more often to really get at the design decisions and the things that really impacted how the stuff was put together. So I think what that's going to mean is that these will probably be a little longer than they were in the past. I hope you're okay with that. And I will try to be as clear and concise as possible. And so to that effect, I'm writing scripts for myself. So I'm reading bullet points and trying to flesh out what I'm doing. So that may seem a little bit different. So I apologize again if this feels a little too structured or ordered from what you're used to. But hopefully I will get used to this format change, and you will as well. And together we'll get to know this content a little bit better. And I hope that that serves the purposes of what I was trying to do with this series, which is give our community and our players a better look under the hood of how things are built the way that they are and why they're built the way that they are. Because a thing that I know has been a source of tension at times is that sometimes the community doesn't have a window into what we do as much as they might like. And so I'm hoping to kind of hit that a little bit more with this series. All that being said, I'm excited to get into game. So I'm going to take a pause here. I will catch up with you very shortly, and we'll start the prologue of Secrets of the Obscure. Okay, we are in game now, and I am going to start our story. Open the journal. So, actually, before I get started, I can talk a little bit about the interlude, which we've named Forward. This story bit was actually part of Expansion 4. It was part of a Secrets of the Obscure initially. The thing about where we were going, and I will also just warn up front, I'm going to spoil lots. Like, yes, I'm playing the story, but this is not a let's play. I have the presumption when I'm doing this series that you all have played the story. If you have not, now would probably be a good time to go finish the story and then come back and watch this series, because I will spoil things that I'm going to cut. I'm not just going to talk about the content that I'm playing. I'm going to talk about the content in a whole picture. So there will be an opportunity for me to get into some of the deeper details. But that does mean if you haven't finished the story and you're not fully caught up, you may get spoiled by some of the things I say. Anyway, that being said, given that Secrets of the Obscure was designed from the ground up to be a good jumping on point for players, that was one of the things that we knew once the Dragon Cycle story ended, that saga of 10 years worth of content and narrative. Once we hit that break point, it was a really good chance for us as creators to say, wow, I mean, hey, we don't have to tell stories in this cycle, and so we can do a whole lot of different things. And it offered us an opportunity to bring new players in and present them a good jumping on point. Um, and so we had a couple goals though with that, which is okay. Let's presume that you're a new player and you just bought Secrets of the Obscure and you haven't played any of the other content, and you're like, man, that's 10 years of story. I just don't have the time to go through that. I just want to enjoy this new expansion that I bought. Awesome. How do you catch players up on what happened over that 10-year span? We did a little bit of that with End of Dragons, where you had the timey cinematic up front that kind of, wrapped all the story up until that point up into a bow. We knew we were not going to have the bandwidth to do another cinematic like that, because they were already wrapped up in starting production on the cinematics that we were already tasking them with. And cinematics budget is always a priority, right? Like to nail up front, and so we had that already slotted. So we thought of, well, we have to say goodbye to Aurene. We have to kind of take that off the table, because she's not going to be part of the story moving forward, along with our other crew. But Aurene was a special circumstance because she's so powerful and so tied to the world that it wouldn't have made sense to do anything else. So we knew we had to close that story off fully, because even though we did sort of end the cycle with End of Dragons, Aurene was still there and she was still kind of hanging out, and so there was a very real possibility that it would add wrinkles to what we wanted to do in the future. So we were going to have to put her to bed at the very least, and then come back to her as a character potentially later. So we created this prologue piece called Forward, and it ended up becoming more of once we authored it, and it was part of Uncertain Times. It used to be part of Uncertain Times. It was just a chapter of that prologue. And we played it, and all the feedback we got was, this doesn't feel right. It feels like this is a different piece. Like it's part of the old story, right? It's not a kickoff to the new story. We are literally saying goodbye to Aurene, and players who are coming into Expansion 4 are not going to know who Aurene is. They're not going to have that emotional connection. And so all of that made total sense to us, and we realized, yeah, you know what? This does need to just be its own thing. It needs to be an epilogue to the epilogue, right? Like we've had all this content that kind of ended the End of Dragon story. And so we kind of internally joked about, the way that Lord of the Rings ended, where it had like 10 endings. And we were like, yeah, we're going to have another ending to End of Dragons. So we had to basically orphan it off, for lack of a better word. And so we divided the content into the prologue and the Aurene farewell, and we were able to split those off separately into their own distinct pieces, which was not an easy task, because we had a lot of links and connections between them all initially, and so we had to sever some of those links. We had to recreate some stuff in different branches of our development pipeline, but it was the right decision. We knew we had to do it. So it was a bit of a headache, but we ended up doing it. So anyway, that is just to say, the prologue for Secrets of the Obscure used to include the piece called Interlude, which I am not going to play because it's really just it's a pocket instance, as I was saying in the intro, where you go in, you talk to Aurene, you have your emotional moment, and it's a beautiful thing. I actually, it's a shame that, I don't know, maybe I will go back and just kind of do a very quick episode on that one specifically, because that was an opportunity for me. I actually got to write all of the optional dialogues for Aurene and Kaith, and I really loved that because I do get to do some writing here and there, but it's definitely not the primary part of my job. But when I do get to write dialogue and build character in that way, I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. So the optional dialogues for Kaith and Aurene were me working with the writing team, of course, to get feedback, but I wrote all of those questions. I tried to think of what I would want to ask Aurene before she goes off to college, or as we used to joke that was us sending her off to college, to Dragon College, to learn how to be a productive member of Tyrian society, or the Tyrian ecosystem, I guess would be a better way to put it. Anyway, that is a lot of preamble to me getting into playing Secrets of the Obscured. But just thought it would be interesting to talk about how the fact that things change over development, and a lot of times it can be a key piece of feedback like that just kind of sends you off in a different direction. And so that's what happened there. All right. Secrets of the Obscure. The commander finds themselves with no shortage of things they could do, but at the same time, they are not feeling a pull toward any distinct purpose. So, as we go, I'm going to start this chapter. We first get a mail from not any one person. So you actually get a mail from whoever is sort of important in your personal story. So because I'm playing a human character, I get one from Lord Farron. If you're playing an Asura, you might get one from Taimi. I think Bram sends the one for Norn. So like everybody gets a different mail depending on your player's character's race. And there are actually a couple different reasons why that is the case. One of the first ones, one of the more technical reasons that happens, is that whenever we ship a new expansion, one of the biggest challenges that we have as developers is we have a lot of people playing our game at any one time. And what we've learned over the years is when we put every single player in the game in the same space at the same time, it just is murder on our servers and our perf, and it's not a good thing. So what we know is that whenever we try to start something new, if we can, as much as we can. Now in the open world that's fine because you can fit, whatever it is, 70 to 100 people in a map. And so that is those servers that host our open world maps, they're designed for that. They're designed to hold lots of people all at once. And so they can spin off different copies of it themselves to kind of bring, but it takes a while for those to fill up. Whereas in story content, you could be playing by yourself, or you could be playing with 4 of your friends, up to 5 people. And so what ends up happening is those servers get hammered a lot more, actually, because you're creating many, many more copies of story maps, potentially. And so that's when you create new story chapters, you create new sort of smaller scale operations like that, it can be kind of problematic to do that. So by creating things like, hey, every race gets a different mail and gets sent to a different place, now you're distributing that load a little bit more. And so our servers and home instances are already in the pipeline anyway. It's not a new map, it's a map that's already on live. Players are hitting it just to get their, their candy corn or whatever,
Replenishing.
That's Halloween's over now, but you get what I mean, right? Like everybody can get into their home instance for a variety of reasons, and they do on a regular basis. So that's less overhead.
Never changes.
To distribute players amongst 4 different places, 5 different places, than just one map. And the other thing is we wanted to establish right up front that, well, there's a tone shift here, right? The commander has been at the forefront of our story for so many years now. They are the champion of the Elder Dragon Aurene. after many years of developing their character to get there. Um, and with that cycle over, we wanted to give the sense that, well, now what? What's next for the commander? And we liked the answer. They're not sure, right? They don't know yet. Nobody's asking them to go do anything. We loved putting the role or the character of the commander in an awkward position of being like, I have all this power and I'm pretty important, but nobody needs me. So what does that mean? What do I do? Um, that spoke to me because I have had that feeling in my career too of like, man, I've been doing this for a very long time. What's next, right? Like, what can I do? What can I do to keep myself vital? So it's a very personal journey for the commander, right? Of like, man, who am I in this post Dragon Cycle world? What is there for me to do? So we really loved that, setting up this tone right away of like the commander being like, I don't know, I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. And then the other thing that this prologue does, kind of speaking to what I was saying before, is it offers us a chance to do a narrative catch-up. So, because the most recent piece of content we had was Ender Dragons, we wanted to, and it's accompanying quarterly releases after the fact, we needed to catch players up on that stuff at the very least, right? Like give them a chance to hear or walk through, literally, what happened to them in Cantha. And so we introduced or reintroduced this character, Mireille, who we only heard. I can't remember if we'd seen her in the story for End of Dragons or not. But she is an opportunity for giving a little bit of exposition of what happened in End of Dragons, as well as the player gets an opportunity to do a little bit of role play using our defunct personality system that was in the game at ship, but then we were unable to support it long term, and so we kind of turned off the ability to use this as a mechanic. But we still like to do it from time to time as a way for players to sort of give their own commander a flavor of their character. So you can offer players choices of how they want to perceive or how they want their commander to be perceived in the wider world. So you can be charming. The crown is like dignified, and the fist is kind of like brusque or maybe even annoying and rude. But that's just a nice way for us to allow small personal choices that players can kind of tailor their commander and do a little bit of RP play. So there's no wrong answers here. This is very much a chance for you to just feel out different answers, and it's always an interesting challenge to like figure out like, well, what would the dignified response to this be, to this character's kind of I mean, let's be honest, this Mireille is sort of a paparazzi or I don't know, gotcha journalist who's trying to get the scoop, and maybe is not doing the best thing in terms of being a good journalist. So yeah, it's tough to figure out what would you say in each of these scenarios to address her rather veiled criticisms of you. Yeah, so the nice thing about this as well is that it gives us a chance to start with a little bit of a different tone, because our previous expansions have all been very action-packed at the start.
Had
and
Commander's
and
retirement
we had some
haunted by
conversations about
dreams
that,
of the
about whether or
past,
not that was the right
screams
move
of
for us to do
war.
in this expansion
I
as
might
well.
not work.
Um,
Oh gosh,
and
this could be
ultimately, I
important.
think we made the right
Do you
call here.
mind?
I think we
I think
said,
I
you know
got what I
what,
need. Just
this
keep
is a
it.
good
Their
chance
name
for
will
us
be
to
painted
do
on
a
every
a
chronicle in
reset
Tyria.
on
Thank you, Commander.
expectations.
You can trust me to tell your story
And
as authentically
you know,
and accurately
I had
as
a giant
possible.
I had a giant sticky note in bold
Thank you,
letters, no
Tiny.
airship crashes, because I didn't want to start that way. I didn't want to have a big fight at the start. I didn't want to have a big, I mean, I'm all for like delivering impact and doing things that um, are bombastic, but I thought in this case, kind of pulling back was actually larger impact, because I think our players by now will probably have expected, our long-term players will have expected that we're going to start with a bang. It's like, no, that we're going to start with smaller scale, quieter, again, setting a different tone to begin this expansion. We wanted we wanted everything here to be light and fun right out of the gate. In particular, because as you will know if you've played the story through to the end, the tone gets really dark. It gets pretty darn bleak. When dealing with Ceres and the Cryptis and the wizards and dark secrets and ancient magics, like there's some pretty heavy stuff. And so we wanted to kind of have this moment to contrast all of that coming darkness by giving you something light and kind of airy and fun and just letting you kind of relax into and again continue to set that tone of like the player is kind of in a lull, for lack of a better word, right? Like they're not sure what to do with themselves. Um, this mail and the resulting moments that you have to talk with your friends is a big part of setting that up. So you get this mail from Timey. She explains that she's patching um, the comm system that you've been using for the last several years to communicate with your friends when they're not around, um, which is a nice little narrative device we have to use now. And so we wanted to give it a little bit of an expansion in this expansion by giving you the ability to
Hi there.
um,
How are you doing?
basically have a prototype
Good.
device in your
Fine,
inventory that you can click and use it to quote unquote call your friends. And this kind of came out of it served two purposes. Number one is because we are in a transitional period where we're moving from one set of characters and one sort of arc of our meta story into a whole new era of establishing new characters. We wanted from the very beginning of our plans, we knew that with this expansion we wanted it to be a mostly not solo, because you do have an ensemble of characters, but it really is the first time that the player and the commander are out there on their own without the support of their team who they have had for 10 years. Like nobody's really coming with us, with one exception, but even that is a different expectation than before. So anyway, so yes, so it helps us to have this device where you can call your friends and you get a touch base with them on what they are all doing, where they are, how they're holding up. So we call Timey. We know that she's still working with June. She's still working on new technologies with Jade Tech. So that's all great. Um, and we loved the humorous capacity here of introducing Tyrion, the first iteration of Tyrion voicemail. Because with Jade Tech is pushing technology in the world quite a bit, and since we have comms technology, it made sense that somebody would have to invent voicemail. I mean, that's a thing we all lived with in the early 90s, and now it's probably a bit archaic. Now everyone texts each other, but so that'll be the next step, right? maybe expansion 5 they can have texting. I don't know. Sorry, I am not signing that team up for anything. I promise. We get to check in with Yao, learn that Yao is,
Can you
doing important things down in the Jade Mines, which we helped them with in the last three,
must be down in the
2-3
Jade
chapters
Mine
of Ender Dragon's story, including the quarterly releases. We learn that Rama and Gorik are working on their detective agency, including synchronizing their jingles, which is fun. It's just a moment of levity for us to establish these characters being kind of at odds with each other, but the odd couple detective agency is a nice trope. Then from a gameplay standpoint, the other thing this does, besides give us a chance to have narrative catch up, which is nice, it also does another piece of that staggering that I talked about at the front. So not only are we sending everybody in the game to 5 different maps to do the story and sort of spread them out that way, but then this serves as a time scattering or staggering mechanic, where some players, and this is why we do this, like some players will click on every one of these and listen to every voicemail or try to have every conversation. There's an achievement for doing that, so players who are chasing that achievement will definitely want to do that. But then the other thing is that some players will maybe click on 1 or 2 and be like, all right, I've heard enough, I'm just going to move on. And then some players will be like, dude, I don't care, right? Just get me to the next chapter. And so you have the option to listen to several, all voicemails, several voicemails, or just the one that you need to progress the storyline. Optional steps like that are a really great way of timing players out, so that some players will do all, some players will do some number of them, and some players will just shoot right for the express lane and go. And that's a really great way we have to tell, or to help distribute players in a different way. And since this series is not about getting everything a completionist playthrough, I'm just going to call Ivan. And Ivan will be the step that progresses us to the next part of this.
Sorry about that. Gorik decided to bring an entire colony of mantid diggers aboard Ivan's ship.
So one other thing that I'll talk about that was a particular design challenge. Implementing design content is a lot of trying to anticipate all the ways that everything goes wrong all the time, right? You're constantly a risk mitigation specialist. That's really what your job is as a game designer, especially when you're doing content. You're trying to think, okay, what happens if I do this? Oh, cool. So right? I don't want players to just automatically, oops, I dragged it out of my inventory, now it's gone. No, so what do? We put the confirm dialogue in here that says, hey, you have to enter the item's name and say that, yes, I really, really want to delete it. Okay, what happens if I do that? Upgraded comms device. And you have to put in the experimental 2, which is a big mouthful, and that's part of the reason I make this name so long, is because I don't actually want you to do this as a player. I'm hoping you're not going to do this. But I have to account for the fact that you may want to. You may say, I want to see what happens. Cool. Well, hey, that's not fair. What happened? I wanted to delete that. No, sorry, you can't. You need it. It's a necessary thing. Now, this is a workaround for the fact that I don't have a quest inventory, right? Our inventory is a one-piece thing. There's bags, there's space. Now there is shared inventory slots, but I can't even guarantee whether you'll A, have a whole lot of these, or B, if they're all filled already, I can't use them, right? So there's a finite amount of space here, and it's not predictable. So I have to stick it in your main inventory because that's the only place where I'm pretty sure you're going to have space. Although there is also that case too. If your inventory is full, it does have provisions in there for it'll try to put it in, and it'll say, oh, you need to make space in your inventory, as you know. So there's always that kind of stuff, right? You have to try to work out what happens. Now in this case, when I double click it now, it says the device is short circuited. Well, that's because I don't need it in this moment. So that was also an issue, was we had to really tightly control when you could use this. This is an example where designers will sometimes do something that the reason this has to be short-circuited in moments like this is that it can create, like, you could call Ivan again potentially, right, and you get yourself into a weird loop, or in a weird state that we can't predict. So we have to sometimes tightly control what you have access to as a game player, right? All right, now I need to go to Gernhoff. So one of the other things that we wanted to do with this expansion is to have a bit of fast engagement, because we knew we were not going to have a big impact moment to start. The other thing we can lean on that works really well is mystery, right? Setting the hook is what I often call this, right? It's like you're fishing. You're putting just enough information out there for players to be like, oh, okay, cool, right? But there's an absence of information, and as human beings, we are drawn to try to fill in the blanks. We love to know the things that are missing. It sort of gets on our nerves when we don't have all the information. So that's one of the tricks that we have as game designers, is to kind of tease out little moments of like, oh, okay, I have no idea what's going on. Something mysterious is happening. I mean, if we weren't like that, we wouldn't have so many giant mysteries and thrillers and across all forms of media. But it is that way because human beings love mysteries. So we decided to start with a mystery, give you a chance to do some investigative work, and learn much about, well, not much. You don't learn much at this stage. You're just starting to get little breadcrumbs that lead you along. Now, one of the things, sorry, I got a little sidetracked because I was thinking of what I was going to say about this, which is this is always a dicey proposition. So this is content this is one of our early maps, level 15 to 25, Kessex Hills, right? So this is a very older map by our game standards. This was authored in 2012, or was authored before 2012 and was shipped with the game when it launched in 2012. So all of these NPCs and all the content that lives in this village is, over 10 years old. And it can be a challenge to go back to 10 plus year old content, because a lot of our standards have changed from the design side. B, our tools have radically changed in that time period. And so the things that we used to be forced to do scripting wise and content wise sometimes are not broken, although that can be the case, but they're very, I'll just say fragile would be a way to put it. So we are very wary as developers of going back to older content and mucking around too much with things. Now, thankfully, again, we've had a lot of technological advancements, and one of the things that we have in our pocket now is this thing called visibility channels. What a visibility channel is it's like a layer that you can put onto content in the world that says, I exist for this content and this content only, and you will not see it if you're not doing this content. Otherwise, you'll see something else, or you won't see anything at all. So that's a technology that we have that we've gotten over the last several years that we have been continuing to use more and more of. So when I approached this, and I was like, okay, obviously we had to go back to Garenhof because that's where the Wizard's Tower was. It was literally floating in the sky right over here. Now it's not. Okay. So like that's a big deal, right? Like how do we do that without wrecking the content that is here? Well, so what I did is I basically copied everything content-wise that exists here in this village. So this is because I'm on this Commander Without a Cause story step, I am seeing that version of all of these NPCs. There are other versions of these NPCs that live on a different layer, and if you're not playing Secrets of the Obscure, if you haven't finished Secrets of the Obscure, you'll see that version of these NPCs. So it's a way for us to get at making sure that what is updated is the new version of these NPCs. The old version of those NPCs still have all the original scripting, all their original references, everything is untouched, with the exception that I put them on a visibility channel that says, hey, you live here in this layer. Cool. So that's the only thing that's different about them. And then that allows me to take the new version of these NPCs that are here for this, and I can add new things to their scripting. I can do more sophisticated things. I can bring them up to our current level of standards. I'm usually still pretty light because I don't want them to seem so different from their other counterparts, their early content counterparts. So I don't touch them tremendously, but I do give them a facelift for being able to be pushed on, because that's the other thing is, like, just like with performance, one of the other things that's consideration is this is an open world map, and everybody on this story step, especially this is true right around when we launch, is that
Can I help you?
you're going to get 50 players at a time talking to Lasha here, right? And so how does she respond to 50 players clicking F interact at the same time? Well, that's where a lot of content can break, because now, our previous scripting standards, we may have had situations where it wasn't expecting 50 players at a time to click on her. And so because this wasn't really like a hotbed of content, there was only like a couple of things that came in and out of this village. It was mostly for flavor. But now we're sending players here for a very specific purpose. So the expectations on this NPC grow. So we ended up having to put in additional protections around her and make scripting for all of these NPCs, with the exception of the vendors. The vendors I don't have to touch because they didn't have any differences. So yeah, so that's a fun thing.
Good to meet you.
Like as an example, like her conversation here is different, and it has this option now, which is you investigating the story of what's happened to the Wizard's Tower. And so we can update things sort of, piecemeal, I guess would be a way to say it. These terrified villagers are new. They did not used to be here. They're here only if you're on the story step, which is a whole other can of worms, which I can talk about when we get to that part of the story.
Usually does the trick. And when we rounded the corner,
I brought this up on my Extra Life stream that this character of April was a character that we wrote for one of our Extra Life kids. She's an awesome person. I'm really glad that we got a chance to put her into our game. And, we love the opportunity to find places to integrate any character that feels thematically fitting. And April, having been investigating the Mesmer Collective the last time we saw her, it made sense that she'd be investigating here. So just a small little nod to that character. This information gathering used to be a different setup.
I don't know. It feels wrong.
Initially,
I don't feel.
It was always that you could find
Is
these
that weird?
in any order you wanted,
mean.
but it used to be the case that you didn't have to find them all. You could, the minute you heard anything about the mayor, you could go straight to the mayor and talk to the mayor. But what that ended up doing is it created weird scenarios where it felt like people were being cheated because they didn't complete this, filling this bar, and then they'd progress to the next step, and it got registered as a bug, which I can totally understand, because you're like, well, I didn't finish finding all the clues, so why did I go get pushed to the mayor? And then at some point I had both of these active, so you could continue gathering information or talk to the mayor, and it was more of a choice, a player choice. But that created also feedback about like, well, this isn't completing, right? So like, I'm like, God, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. I either get bugs one way or I get bugs the other way. And so I ended up doing it the linear way, because it was the easiest thing to do at this time. And it really does make sense. Like, yeah, I mean, even if you hear about the mayor, it still is. Oh, hello. It still is totally makes sense that you would try to gather as much information as you can before you speak to the mayor. In hindsight, I would have loved if we maybe had written a line to that effect, of the player being like, oh, you know, I should find out everything I can.
I can't comfort them. I can barely keep myself from panic.
Town Guard Plushie, Joe Plushie. That's my headcanon, is that this guy's name is Joe. So this guy's conversation wasn't tremendously different, but yeah, we did subtle updates on everybody. Including guys like villagers who were just standing around. Although, here's a nice bug that you find, you know, whatever, 6 months almost after launch. All these villagers are supposed to be facing the tower and pointing at the tower. Instead, they're, I guess, oh, that's probably why. I did not disable their rotate on interact. Here, I'm gonna fix them all. Now you're all facing the right way. These kids are also sort of hidden. I don't know how many people have clicked on them. They don't have proper names, which usually indicates to our player base that they don't have conversations. I kind of not snuck these in, because obviously the development team themselves were aware of it, because anytime you put in text, it has to go through a whole process to get edited and localized. So it wasn't like I was hiding this, but yeah, these children don't have actual names, which means that a lot of players won't click on them, but they do have something to say.
It's always been there, watching.
See, the mayor has his flag correctly set where he will not rotate when you interact with him. I did not set that on these NPCs, which means that they do spin to face whoever is interacting with them, which is a neat feature a lot of the time, but there are times when it kind of breaks the illusion a bit, and that's, these villagers should have that flag checked and they don't. So that's a bug on me. That's great. It's a minor bug. It's a cosmetic bug, but still.
Time to feel the fury.
Let's see. What else am I needing to talk about? Because I feel like there's something else I wanted to say before I engage the mayor here. So yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, one of the things we wanted to do here in Chapter 1 as well is to, as I said before, subvert your expectations a bit. So you're out there alone for the first time in a long time. You don't have the backup of your team, so it's kind of a bit more like, geez, okay. It's been a while since I had to do this on my own. Like, you know, I've been relying on so many other people around me that, like, we wanted to sell that idea of like, wow, okay, I got to figure stuff out, which is kind of fun. Puts us in a different position right? From the standpoint of narrative goals. Um, and then the other thing we wanted to do, and this just goes to speaks to the larger theme of doing the Wizard's Tower in the first place, is we wanted to get back to our roots a bit. Like, is a good case in point. I'm standing here next to a mech, right? Which is how far we've come from, in Guild Wars 2. Our technology level has advanced. We've got a basically a primitive prototype cell phone in our pocket now. So technology is a thing, and we're not going to get away from technology, right? It's there, it exists in the world. But we kind of wanted to recapture the sense of magic, go back to our roots a little bit, and tell a story that's a little more simple and magic themed, and really get at this mystery and discovery of arcane secrets. Like Secrets of the Obscure was a very deliberately chosen title. We're talking about stuff that, because technology has the power to answer a lot of questions, but it really can't answer a lot about magic, right? Like, it's not, you can't use technology to solve for magical conundrums necessarily. You can use technology to maybe get around them, but they're not going to have any explanatory power, if you know what I mean, right? So that's a thing that we wanted to do. Okay. Mayor has some information. He talks about this strange group of people that was in town asking after all these different people around, and yes, so now we're going to go and we're going to have a conversation with terrified villagers. And you can hear all about, oh my gosh, the challenges of trying to do open world content in a map that's 10 years old.
Don't touch me!
So these terrified villagers were added to this story step. They didn't used to be combat encounters, but it was given to me, feedback was given to me, that we had a lot of no fighting happening at the start of this expansion, which was by design, as I called out at the start. We wanted it to be light, but I think we maybe erred too far on that side, to where we definitely got some pushback from design leads and other folks that this is cool and all, but like, I want to hit something. I need to use my skills, right? Like, we are a combat action RPG. Combat's a pretty big part of our mechanics. We definitely use skills and our build, craft, and all that stuff, and we want to be able to use that. So I took a look and said, okay, well, where can I put some of that in chapter 1? Because we want to have something, right? Before you get to the instance where you'll have more combat. Well, even the instance is pretty light on combat, all things considered, right? At least until you get to Ceres. So I thought, well, because initially you just talk to these NPCs and they would give you hints and clues, and you would have to, and then they were the ones who gave you the clues to the house that you're going to investigate, because that was the initial design plan. And then we decided, no, actually, if we're going to put combat in, they would be a good place to put it, because as we learn later too in the open world, when players are corrupted or possessed by Cryptus, they will sometimes turn hostile. They'll turn against you. And so we wanted to seed a little bit of that and give players a small preview of what that looks like before they get to the new maps. So we ended up engineering these NPCs to do that, which suited our narrative purposes. But the challenge here is, again, this is 10-year-old content. Well, this isn't 10-year-old content. This is new content in a 10-year-old map. Which means every event in this map is like a level 20 map, right? So events are all level 20. Enemies scale only to level 20. And even though players are downscaled, right? I only have 1900 hit points here in this map because we have a downscaling system so that you can play with your friends and be, and not feel like you're just one-shotting everything. But when players get together, they can one-shot everything because even though with power curve has even though we're scaling players down, the power curve over the years has grown such that each individual player might not struggle with older content, but when you get 2 players, it radically changes. If you get 3 players, it's even more. And so, like, the more players you add, and so again, we're expecting on launch day 50 players who might be in this map. So that's one of the reasons why, again, I spread out these villagers across the town. So now there's 5 of them, right? So even if there's 50 players in this map, hopefully they're not all hitting the same villager. But I have to account for that. They might. So we have to create a way to host this content. And so the solution to that is to use our dynamic event scaling. So when you talk to them, it triggers a fight and it starts an event. And the reason we do this is because events can scale NPCs. So if I looked at this NPC's health, actually, can I do that? I can't remember if I can do that. I think we have a way to show target health percent. Now, I thought we had a way to show. I might be thinking of a different game. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I don't remember how many hit points they end up with, but they end up with a fairly significant chunk of hit points. They're definitely, even though they're a level 20 character, they are way more powerful than an average level 20 character. Because as you see, like, I'm not even attacking this character is attacking, and they're doing light damage, but this NPC is not dying right away. So that's one of the challenges, but that's what putting an event on this NPC does. It allows this event to scale, which scales this character's health and damage and all that stuff. And they have the barest hint of Cryptus possession, which you'll see this effect on Cryptus possessed NPCs. They have this, like, I don't know, like, funky, weird eye mask thing. So that's a challenge that you have to solve, is how do you make content that's relevant. The other thing that events do that's really helpful is that events give participation for anybody in the area who participated. So if you did any amount of damage to this NPC, you'll get credit for completing that event. So that is how I can have everybody that's doing this quest step get credit and move on. And although I didn't actually do any damage to him, so that's good. Oh, I may have found a bug. That's cool. I always love when I do that. Let me see if going out and back in gets me in a different state, or if I have to restart the step. That's interesting. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I did account for the corner case, but I guess I didn't have it update right away, so you have to go into the map again to get it to update.
What do I do? The villagers are asking questions.
I think I had a bug on that. I think I just was okay with that, because I think it's rare that you start an event and then you kind of hang back and don't do anything and you let somebody else complete it. But that is the case, right? Like I was saying at the start, you have to try to think of every weird thing that can happen, because when you put enough players in the game into a system like this, it's Murphy's Law, right? Like, what can happen will happen. So anyway, now we're moving on. Yeah, but the other thing that creates problems for, and that's, I could do a whole talk on that, and so I won't get into too much detail, is like these terrified villagers have to be able to survive their fight. So that's one. They have to be able to not get killed instantly. And then they also have to be able to go into a state where they reset. And they go over and they lie down and they sleep or, rest. And then they come back. And they do that because, and they don't take very long to get back into it, because they have to be available for the next player or the next group of players to come along who are also on that step. So this is the nature of an MMO, right? Like when you have multiple players all doing the same thing in a persistent map like this, you do have to kind of take some liberties with immersion, and you have to end up doing, a bit of theme parking, as they say, where, it's like, you do yours, and then the next person has their turn, and the next person has their turn, and there's times when we don't really always account for that well, and you end up with, I think we had an NPC on live that players had to literally queue up for, which is old school MMO design, because that's used to be the technology level. We used to be able to have to push people into like a queue, because you couldn't have them be available on multiple levels for different players. All right, now we're going to investigate this house. So again, this is an opportunity. I love games where there's a lot of investigation work. The Witcher series is known for this. There's some of this in Cyberpunk, or any sort of top line, I think, AAA RPG. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 has great examples of this that just allow you to kind of get into the world by clicking on things and reading descriptions of them and learning a little bit about what's going on. It may not actually progress your immediate goals, but it just helps give you context for the world. It helps you give, narrative tidbits about what's going on, until you find the thing that you need to progress to the next step. I could have gone whole hog. I could have made everything in this little place clickable. I considered doing that. I did some more of that sort of stuff in Ender Dragons. When you went to my Trin's apartment, I made as many things clickable as I could make clickable, because I love that kind of stuff. I really enjoy that level of interactivity. In this one, I went pretty light. I gave you a few things to click on and one, because there's really only the one thing you need to find. And that shows you where you're supposed to go next. It's always interesting to try to figure out how much is enough, how much is too much. And it's not just about what you present to the player. Everything that you do in this vein has downstream effects. So everything I make interactable with a conversation has to go now through editing and localization. And we have word counts and budgets. We can't exceed those, or it starts putting people into overtime. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to make people work harder because I was too enthusiastic about writing, conversations on every little thing that you could click on, right? I love that kind of stuff, but I don't want to create far, far more work than other teams anticipate, and make them pay for my, enthusiasm, because that's not cool. That's not what you do when you're working on it as part of a team. So those are the things you have to think about. All right, and now I'm going to go to Broad Hollow Waypoint. All right, so Chapter 1 has a couple of things about it. One is that we're worried about trying to establish how long do you let the player linger, right? Like, because as I was saying before, like there was a lot of there hasn't really been much combat yet, and so we're now at the point where I think this is where some of our feedback came from, right? Which is I'm getting tired of just running around looking for stuff, right? Like yes, I was engaged by the mystery, but now I'm starting to get worn out. So you have to kind of start pushing players towards doing one of two things. One is either getting them more deeper involved in the storyline, which we can do through characters, which we do a little bit of here, or we start moving them towards, things happening, like the plot moving forward. And so that's where this part of the chapter comes up. Similar to the Garenhoff content, this character was updated. She is an example, though, of where I did not put her on a visibility channel. Instead, because her script was fairly basic, she only had this conversation, or actually she only had, if you clicked on her, she would do her scout thing, which if you click on that, it's supposed to load that up. That's weird. Huh. Alright, that seems like that's broken. Another bug. Raya. She's supposed to show you what's... Oh, you know what? I think the reason that doesn't work is because I've already completed this Renown Heart. So Scout, or I've completed all of Renown Hearts on this map, because this character is 100% world complete. So if you do not have these hearts completed in the map, in the area, the Scout is supposed to show you what you can do. But because I've completed it all, she has nothing to show me, which is a bug in itself, because she probably shouldn't show you this option as a choice on the dialogue, on the conversation. Anyway, she has a new conversation option where you can ask her about new faces in the area, and that kind of is supposed to give you a clearer thing, because this is what I was trying to allude to. One of the things that we have been moving towards as designers and developers is giving players a lot more agency. Games like Elden Ring and others of the last several years have kind of pulled back more on games being so hand-holdy as to like give you very specific, and we definitely fall into that trap as well. We have a linear story. A lot of times things are marked for you, where to go, what to do, who to talk to, who to see, right? Who to fight. It's very much very clear. And that clarity is helpful, but there are times when it's like, no, we don't want clarity here. We want you to have to hop around a bit. We want you to wander. We want you to explore the world. Not for long, because it gets back to what I was talking about, where, if you spend too long wandering around, you're like, God, just tell me where to go already. So there's a tension there. There's a balance we have to strike. So my hope was that when you see this scout, who else would know what's going on in the area but a scout, right? Like, and they have this marker on their head. So you can ask the scout, hey, I've been looking for new people in town. And she will say, yes, they've south of here, right? And that gives you a direction of like, okay, so if I look at my map, south of here would be here, which is, it's technically southeast of her, but, the scout probably should know cardinal directions better than she is letting on here. That is a example of where I probably would have sent that back for editing again, but
Two near
it is what
Salma
it is.
yesterday too. That's what, 6 this week? Wait, someone's coming.
I called this out on my extra live stream that this object here, this energy probe, is a cool little artifact from Living World, where Scarlet was looking for ley lines because she wanted to do stuff with Mordremosh, which I won't tell you. I won't say much more about it in case there's people who haven't played that and don't want spoilers on other content. I'm totally okay spoiling sort of high level stuff and obviously Secrets of the Obscure, as I was saying at the start, but I'll try to not spoil heavy story details on other things. But anyway, this was a leftover from that content that we're not going to see and encounter in the instance that we go to later, so I put these NPCs here hammering on it to imply that they're taking it down finally, because it's not really needed anymore. And then here we go, starting to introduce you to our new characters. So this first character, all of our characters here are just called Sketchy Individual because we don't know anything about them. And also I will call out that I put similar confusing or updated conversations on the merchant here, so who's here, but she's like, yeah, I don't know who these new people are. They're kind of weird. They're edgy. So again, just to continue to bring a little bit of I don't know, additional layers to the world that has existed since 2012.
I need you to move along. You're not supposed to be here.
So we are not going to introduce ourselves yet.
I've seen you folks around here before. Thought I'd say hello.
We're trying to be cordial, and they are like, just get the hell out. We don't need you here. There's a direct narrative reason for this, which we will learn in this chapter and later. Basically, so we know that later we'll find out these are the Astral Ward. This is Arena. She's the leader of this group of Astral Ward. They know exactly who you are. They are very well briefed on you as the commander. They really don't want you here messing with what they're trying to do. They're here on a hunt for Cryptus. They know that there are Cryptus in the area. They're trying to track them down. They really don't need, an anomaly or a weird outlier like the commander coming in and messing with their stuff. So they're not super pleased to see you, but they're trying not to let on that they know who you are. So they're just like, yeah, just get out of here. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's just get on, because I think that's all I'm going to have to say about
Guess I'm
this
on my own
open
with
world
this one.
content.
I should wait until dark. See if I can sneak in.
That's a line that we definitely got some feedback on because, as you see, this is night. So having the player say, I should wait until dark, I think some players may get confused, like, well, what do you mean? It is dark. It's night. Well, it is, but as you can see, night in our game is not particularly dark. It wasn't at live. And in a lot of even our current maps, night is often not particularly dark. It's an aesthetic choice, right? That's an artistic decision that was made years ago that we need to kind of hold with exceptions because, we want it to be consistent across the game. So how do we solve that? By when you enter the instance, and love that we were able to get concept art to give us an updated nighttime version of the loading screen for this map.
Better. It should be dark enough that I won't be spotted unless I
Now
get
it's
close.
dark, right?
All
So
right.
I think what we've
It
always
looks clear for
kind
me
of gone with our night lighting is it's kind of like twilight more than night. For like I said, for aesthetic reasons, because it is more beautiful, right? To see vivid colors, and we've always kind of gone with a fantasy painting aesthetic in our style. So it makes sense that we would continue that. But for this purposes of this mission, we did want real darkness, and so I worked with our amazing map art team to get a much different environment design and push the limits of what we could do to represent real darkness and night. I think this is still on the lighter side compared to what I may have had in mind, but I totally understand why we may not go full dark, because it's really hard to see
I feel good.
anything when it's that dark, and we don't have great ways to enhance the dark because players don't have
Something's
light
going on
sources
over
to kind of do stuff. So like it would just be frustrating if it was so dark that you can't see what you're doing or where you're going. But kudos to our incredible team Jeff Weber was the map artist in particular who helped get us to this place. But we really need to sell the mechanics that are coming up here. So we had to get as dark as we could get, and I think we succeeded quite well. So yeah, let's talk about the mechanics here, since we are entering into this area. So in Ender Dragons, we had a couple of renown hearts in the Echovald Forest that were based on social stealth, right? So we've done stealth missions in the past, but we haven't done a lot of social stealth until we did those 2 renown hearts. Social stealth is where you're not necessarily trying to hide, you're trying to disguise. You're trying to obfuscate who you are with either a literal disguise or by doing a combination of things. And I want to expand on that here and use that same system. So I basically just took that system, which one of our gameplay engineers, Eric Fagerstrom, he did build a lot of that system for Ender Dragons, and I consulted with him and basically was able to take that system, copy the parts I needed, break it down, pull it apart, tease it in, and then put it all back together again with what I was trying to build, which is same sort of thing. This is a social stealth mechanic where you are, as you saw, they weren't trying to attack you. They know who you are, and they would rather you not be here, and so they will kick you out if they spot you, and that's represented by these vision cones. And the vision cones are not meant to be like, oh, these people are blind, right? But I mean, they kind of are, right? Like, that's why I was hoping and pushing for getting the map as dark as we could, because that's how it makes sense that they can't see you. Beyond, I don't know if you've ever been out in the dark at night, especially, in the wilderness. And, in this is a fantasy world. We don't have skyscrapers. We don't have light pollution yet. So, in big cities, I mean, we have big cities, so maybe there's some light pollution around the cities, but even so, the cities are all lit by, lots of flame and, and they don't have giant, spotlights and harsh fluorescence, kind of bleeding up into the atmosphere. So we pushed the dark here so that, you could believably see that, until you get within a few feet of them, they're probably not going to see you in the shadows. And even then, at the edges of the thing, they're going to be able to spot you, and then they'll kick you out, right? But you have to be pretty close before they recognize that, hey, that this moving thing that's 6 feet in front of them is another person. It's an intruder. So that's what this mechanic is based around. They'll kick you out, and you just have to restart. So it's a soft penalty. You don't have to, do anything too bad to get back in or anything. So.
Move out. As soon as I see your signal, I'll rally the rest of the camp.
And then from there,
I'll be right behind you.
one of the things that we need to do up front is we need to teach. So we need to teach the system, which is why you got that hint at the start that, hey, if you linger too long, you'll accrue suspicion, or if you get spotted, you'll just get kicked out. If you do other kinds of things, you might get. I'll go over those in a minute when I get to them. But we put in an eavesdrop spot here to teach you that yes, you can hide in certain bushes and overhear conversations. That's one way of gathering information. Once this step comes up, you can. It turns. It doesn't turn into it. It expands your just the basic mechanics of being in the suspicion system into now it's the equivalent of it's a social stealth sandbox is what I was calling it internally, which is it's pretty open, right? Like all you're doing is again you're gathering more information, you're doing an investigation. This crate of supplies is pretty integral to helping you with that because you can put on a disguise. So now I'm dressed like an Astral Ward, even though I have a giant legendary sword and big floaty wings. So it's not going to hold up for too long because, as you see, if I stand in here, I do start gaining suspicion at an accelerated rate because it's like, well, you're wearing the right clothes, but you're not looking quite right. So, and then you can clear your suspicion by hiding. So that's, kind of the risk reward factor of this sort of a system. This particular step, though, does have a bit of a interesting component to it, in the sense that there's no indication of it yet, but you are actually on a timer, because even though you are creeping around and discovering things in this camp, you could, take a while to do that. I wanted it to be the case that you may not find any information on the astral ward before you get pulled into this world. I was totally okay with that. Because I really wanted to feel like, yeah, things are happening in the world regardless of the player, which is, again, a bit of a subversion of expectations, because so much of storytelling within our game and sometimes in other games as well is you're the center of the universe, and nothing happens if the player doesn't engage it, right? And you can't do that. You can't do the hidden timer thing too much, because then it feels like you're not in control ever. So I had to be very cautious about exercising it here, but I thought it really made sense, because these people they're waiting to hear back from somebody before they begin their hunt, and that's totally going to happen whether you gather information or not. And so we have multiple mechanics within this pool. So again, here's the crate where you can get a disguise. There are papers you can read to learn information. When you do learn information, notice that it changes the nameplates. So now I know that her name is Rena.
Guards aren't tossing them out. Might make for
and I
some
know
good
that
cover.
everyone else in the camp are called Astral Ward. So I've learned information from that page. When you hide in the bushes, you can't be seen, and it removes you out of the suspicion system, but you can't do anything else. You just have to hide. And in order to get out of hiding, you have to stop hiding and get out, and then you can have access to what you were doing before. You can try to blend in with these bystanders, and you'll talk to them, and just like the bushes, it puts you in this state of like you're acting, so you have to play your role and not cause suspicion, and then you can stop to get back into it. There's a couple of NPCs you can have a conversation with. They won't talk to you if you are not disguised, because it doesn't make sense that they would talk to some stranger about anything. So you have to get the disguise on, and then they'll have a quick conversation with you.
A couple days before you.
I had to keep all of this stuff brief because, you've got roving patrols of people, right? So, you don't want to be locked down for more than a few seconds. So now here we see the hunting party leaves. Even though I had to hide the timer because I wanted to feel like you weren't in complete control of the situation here, I did get feedback that it was frustrating, because they'd get to the end and they'd be like, well, I don't understand. Why did the quest progress? So now I've put this, I changed it so that you could see, hey, this is what's happening. You got 2 minutes left, minute and a half now. And then I also put markers on all the things you didn't find yet, so that if you really do want to push hard, you can get everything done before the time runs out.
Help me gather some loot for Narcissus.
The marker thing is one of those concessions that you make as a designer. If I was making a different kind of game, I wouldn't have probably put the markers on there. I would have exposed the timer. I think the timer is a good thing to do, to show players, hey, time is running out. I probably would have found a more diegetic way to put it. I probably would have put like a torch.
A little.
you know,
One
or a
seems to
series
think
of
they're tracking
torches
something
around the
or
camp that, like,
someone here
once the
from
last
Centurion.
torch is lit, you know,
Hang in
they'll
there.
start the hunt. So that way you could see clearer, and it's not just the
I don't
game telling
understand
you.
why we can't just ask for help.
But
It wouldn't be
if
a
I-
fight.
yeah, anyway,
They're the truth.
I didn't have the
would
time
scare
to do
them.
that. So,
It's not time, and it's not our call to make.
but yeah, it's always a challenge to tell how much to breadcrumb the player versus how much not to breadcrumb the player. Finding narrative clues is always good, though in this case, I think we were okay with the player not necessarily having all the information, because that's kind of what we want to put the player's headspace in the first place. Is they're learning a new paradigm, and it's okay not to know everything, but still, need to perform your duties, right? Like, how many people? I mean, I'm sure if you work a job, you can relate. That first week on the job, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I go into meetings and I listen and I'm hearing stuff, and it's like I get maybe 25% of it, and the rest I'm like, what? I had no idea, right? Like, that's a real thing that people have to deal with. And so I wanted to capture that here of, like, it's okay to not have gathered all the information. If you do, that's cool. You get achievement for doing it, right? Like, or even if it's, I can't remember if I put the achievement in for that, but you at least get the pride of knowing, yeah, I completed that quest step. Awesome. I get bragging rights. I found all the things. That's cool. But yeah, it's okay to not know everything and still have to move forward. That was basically the attempt I was trying to make with the way that was set up. To loop into now again, like, there being a timer on this hunt, I had to do a stop here because what I ended up finding was that a lot of players weren't keen in enough to where they would come up here and eavesdrop in the right place. Even though there was a marker there, sometimes they'd be like, well, I was still looking for stuff to find. And so I had to trim that down and say, no, I have to wait for the player to engage this, because if you're not here and they have the speech and the hunt goes on, then they go off and you never find them again, right? Like, I mean, even though they don't go that far, I won't say you will never find them again, but it presented a lot of challenges where players would be like, I don't know, they were up here and then they disappeared and now I don't know where to go. Which is a thing that could happen. So you have to be really careful about figuring out where to breadcrumb, how much to breadcrumb, and all of that. Anyway, let's go ahead and
my friends.
trigger this to start.
I need you to channel Mabon's determination and Dagda's
Get to
strength.
hear Arena, who is voiced by the
while we fight
incredible
off the
Jennifer
cryptozoan
Hale.
alone,
Jennifer
our
Hale,
allies
of
are
course,
working to
is one of
seal the
our
rifts from
player
above.
characters. She's the Sylvari
have
human,
a hunt
or Sylvari female. Sylvari are not human.
With
The
me.
Sylvari female
And what
player
are we
character.
hunting?
She has also been in numerous other video games, including Mass Effect and Metal Gear, and just had a long and illustrious career. We are so lucky that we get to work with her. And she brought a lot to the role of Arena, even though there weren't a whole lot of lines yet in this chapter. She will have lines later, as you've probably, if you've played any of the new content that came out on Tuesday of this week, you will have seen that Arena does make a reappearance. And I'm totally missing stuff. Although that is cool to see it from back here. Amazing work by our visual effects artists to make this rift as creepy and cool as it is.
No! Stay away from it!
You know who I am?
So this moment, I could talk a lot about. I may not. Well, so this went through a lot of iteration because it is what we call a cin event, where it's a cinematic moment in the game that happens in the game engine, and you're not gaining control taken away. It's not a cinematic. But it's meant to sort of prepare the scene, set the scene for the player. So the rift appears, this thing pops out of it, and then the Astral Ward are all like gunning to fight it, and then it does an attack, and some of them flee, some of them are killed. Others are pulled into the portal. It's a huge mess, which is hard to pull off. I will say I'm not super happy with how this ended up turning out. I think I got it to what I consider a shippable level. I really think it could have been better. If I'd had more resources, I would have probably pushed on it a little bit harder. But given that this was at the end of a story chapter, which wasn't a heavy combat chapter to begin with, it didn't necessarily warrant or justify the amount of time that I could have taken to bring it to the next level. Which is always the thing you have to do in game development, is you have to assess, could this be better? Yes, it could. Is it a good return on your investment of how to get it better? No, maybe not. This was the case here, where I think the return on investment, trying to make this moment, which only happens, it's literally a 5-second thing, right? Like, and so part of that math that you do is it's only a 5-second thing, and it is chaotic, right? Like, it's happening in the middle of gameplay. I mean, in my case too, like, I was way across the map. I was still back at the camp by the tent. I didn't even see it, which is going to happen to some players. So, like, really, like, is it worth spending time if you don't even know where the player is going to be at that point, or where they're facing, or what they're doing? I mean, you can do some stuff to set that up, right? Like, I could have had the portal not appear until the player arrives, but that again gets into that weird state of, like, if I can help it, I try to have the game world run irrespective of the player in this case. And that was a definite design choice that we made for this expansion, which may be different than previous content. And again, we're doing that because we wanted to subvert expectations a little bit. But this is the first time, not the first time, because we saw the other 3 characters, but this is really the first time you get to see a Cryptus and have an actual decent encounter with one, which takes a lot of noodling to get right, because you want them to, there's this tension between, you want them to be fearful, right? You want them to feel like, oh man, what is this thing, and why am I, it's kicking my butt. Except it really can't. Like, it has to be somewhat easy to fight, because it's your first time, right? Like, you have no idea what to do with it. I don't like to throw players into the deep end of the pool. Middle of the pool, sure. And so I think that was where we struck that balance there with that fight. And then you get pulled into Nyos. And here's where everything starts to change. This is where the expansion really starts. I mean, it's funny because for a long time I had almost thought of that whole sequence up until this point as the prologue. But when we got down to it, when we looked at how long it took to get through to get through all of that, we were like, no, there has to be a chapter in here. It wasn't going to work for it to be only the prologue. So we broke that into prologue and chapter 1, and then this is chapter 2, the start of chapter 2. So right away, I will point out, like, we did a lot artistically, design-wise, to try to shift radically. Now this is totally different, right? You are in a strange place you've never been before. It's not recognizable. It's kind of like an alien landscape with these giant red vines everywhere, dead bodies on the ground of your, the people you just met as Astral Ward. You don't know them, but they're all dead, and that's not a good sign. You have this buff on you that is poisoning you, making you sick to your stomach. You're weak. It's cutting into your health. It's cutting into your energy. Wow, like, what's going on, right? Like, what the hell is happening? But I mean, all that is absolutely the thing we're trying to set. We crafted this segment to be like this because one of the things that, obviously with us moving to an expansion that has a lot of verticality, we needed to give players things like gliding, and basic mount use, right? And you're gonna eventually get access to the sky skills. So like, there's a lot of aerial component to this expansion. Well, how do we tell players how to glide if they've never used a glider before? Because we gift them that first glider mastery. Well, make it so that you are forced to do it. That's one of the ways that you can put a teachable moment. I mean, thankfully, gliding is not that particularly hard. It's just holding the space bar. But it is still a thing that you have to teach. And then we get down to this platform, and now we're going to introduce Ceres. And if the previous Cryptus appearing with the Rift was a sin event, Ceres' introduction is kind of what I would call a min event, a mini cinematic event, mini scene event. I don't know. We didn't have an official title for it, but basically he's just unlurking with a cool animation. We do a quick camera pull to make sure that you see him land and you see him set up, and then he spends time kind of stalking you because he's really interested in. This is a fun project to figure out how to make this character feel threatening
Don't take another step.
and not necessarily evil yet, but threatening and intimidating and scary as hell. And so we created him in this fashion where he just kind of comes in and he talks to you because he's not threatened by you at all. So he's not even going to be hostile at first. He's sort of like, But then he decides that you're a tasty morsel and he really would like to eat you. So he then turns into a bit more of a hostile force. Yeah, but I mean, both with the environment and with Ceres, and now you can see the environment starts to get really, really challenging. So you get horribly sickened, and now you have very little energy regen. Your health is getting tanked. We wanted to sell that. Yeah, this place is trying to kill you, not just Ceres, right? Like you're in a hellhole. The Temple of Phoebe, as we later learn is called, is not good. And we're trying to establish, certain things like when you go down, Ceres is not interested in finishing you off. He's happy to watch you bleed out. So he's just sort of pacing back and forth, patiently waiting for you to die, although we have down skills, so we can get back on our feet, which he will comment on later, because he's not seen this kind of tenacity. And now we hear this also strange voice start to chime in. And we're really amping up the like, I have no idea what is going on. Why is this like this? What's happening? And it's really challenging as a designer, as a developer, to build a moment like this and have it not suck. I mean, really not suck, right? Like, because believe me, the first several times I implemented this, it sucked. It felt bad. It felt awful. It felt cheap. It felt unfair. It's really, really a tough thing to do. You're walking a fine line between players feeling like they're enjoying what's happening and they're getting what you're trying to sell them, right? Like you're understanding the tone and that this is what you're supposed to be doing, but at the same time it's like, but why? Why game? Why am I moving so slowly? Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately it's because it's a forced loss, right? Like at some point, regardless of what you do, Ceres will get bored. He will punch you into the earth, into the ground, and you will be flat on your back. That is a given. That happens for every player. It doesn't matter how powerful you are. and that's a tough thing because again, our player base, the curve between our players who really are not like super invested in build crafting and min maxing every possible skill and getting every ounce of stats they can is different, is a gulf, right? Like there's a lot of players who are like me, who are like, man, I just want my player to look cool. Like I don't care what I look like. I mean, I care what I look like. I don't care how I'm performing on my DPS meter. It's not a big deal to me. As you can see, in particular, this character is a low DPS character, probably. I would assume, because I barely made a dent in Ceres. She's a mesmer, and I love her look and aesthetic. I don't care about what she does output wise, because I don't play endgame and I don't play world versus world or anything like that. So it's a solo PvE experienced player. So I have to account for that. But then I also have to account for players who are, play PvP and world versus world and endgame, and they have cranked every single slider they can to make their maximum optimal build, and they can probably put out 15 or 20 times the damage output that I can. They may actually do a fairly decent amount of damage to Ceres. So I have to try to make something that feels good as far as a forced loss goes. And forced losses never really feel great. They always feel like, something that you wish maybe was different, or like, man, I would have done this if only the game wasn't ignoring, my ability to do X or Y or Z. But when you're setting up a cinematic moment like this, and this chase is a great example of that. So like the fight was one set of rules. The chase is a whole other thing, because the chase now is how do you build suspense in a game where players have so much power? Well, this is a case where I'm forced to do things I don't necessarily want to do, and I take away every toy the player has. So you get in here and you've got no skills. You are, limping your way towards the end of the hall. I deliberately made this a very short hall because I don't want to extend the pain that players may feel at being so restricted. But I do want to set up that Ceres is a force, and you really don't have a way to fight him at this point. You can do some things, like you can glide a couple spaces, which is great. That's a nice little way to, so I don't take away every single toy, but you do have to take away most toys, and then this chase sequence went through so many iterations to get to this point, and I was gonna say until I get it right. I'm not even sure this is right either. I think again this is one where I probably could have spent another 2 months iterating on to make it even more like, are there other things you could do? Like could you find a rock and throw the rock and distract Ceres and get him to chase after something else instead of looking for you? Probably. There's all kinds of things I could have pursued, but I ended up doing this. I had the bushes, which was a nice little nod because you spent an entire instance learning about, how to use the bushes to hide. So it's like, yeah, let me go back to the mechanic that you worked on in the previous part of the chapter and do it that way.
Alchemy, it worked.
Take a deep breath. Count to 3 and think of your fondest memory. Traveling through the mists can be taxing on the mind.
They've got experience with this kind of thing.
And now we end up in this new place with new characters, and again we're asking ourselves, what the heck? Where am I? What am I doing? Who are these? We know one of these characters now. It's Zoja, who we are getting back into the story. But everyone else is like, wait, what? And
What are you doing
where
here?
is this place?
We'll give you the full
It's
breakdown once
funky.
things settle. Maban, you gonna look for the other wizards?
Wizards? Wait, who are you?
Cool your blood, Commander. Maban is one of us. Yes, I'll meet you outside.
I want to talk a little bit before, while these guys are talking and while the story is going on. I'll talk a little bit about
sharp as
the
always,
cinematic
Commander.
itself. So
You two with me.
as you saw when we were transitioning out of that instance and into the next thing, there was a load screen that was an animated load screen. That was our first actual animated load screen. I think we've done something before, maybe. I don't remember. Somebody pointed out that they thought that there was another one already in the game. But I can definitely attest this was the very first use of new tech that we got, where we could actually plug in a Bink video file that loops to have, instead of a static loading image. So that did not exist before the Secrets of the Obscure expansion. So we were able to get that in, which was awesome because we got feedback pretty early on from our cinematics director and a couple other art folks that, our load screens are kind of jarring. They're a transition that are a necessary transition for us because of our technological limitations in terms of how we built content and maps. But the more we can smooth over that transition, the better. So since you go into a portal and then you pop out of a portal in another map, could we bridge that by having the load screen look like traveling through a portal? And that's what we ended up doing. And it really works quite well, I think. But I went through a lot of prototyping and iteration, and a huge shout out to the engineer and cinematics folks who made that happen, because I think it really helps sell what we can do with load screens now. So that was sort of the first use of that tech, and as like anything, I expect that we'll probably come back to use that tech again in a different way, and we'll maybe find new cool ways to use that same technology. Yeah. All right. And then the other thing I can talk about here is, obviously we are reintroducing our fan favorite character Zoja, who has not been part of the story since Heart of Thorns, really. And then we've also introduced Maban and this burly Norn, who we will later learn is named Frode. And getting Zoja back into the story took some effort, I will say. I wanted her in from the very beginning. Even when we were doing pre-production work and we didn't even have a finalized pitch, I was working Zoja into my pitches because it made sense. Like when we knew the thematic part of, we're going to start a new story and we're going to go back to ancient secrets and the Wizard's Tower and other things like that, it really made sense for us that we would go towards bringing Zoja back, because it gave us an opportunity to explain where she's been, because she has been out of the story for some time, and the last we heard, we weren't even sure of the status of her health. And so we knew that, hey, if we're going to bring somebody back, there's a great avenue for doing that, but we need a lot of explanatory content to do that. Well, her hiding out with the wizards in the Wizard's Tower felt like a really natural way to do that. So once we knew that we were doing that, I was very vocal in my support of saying, let's see if we can plug Zoja in. And one of the challenges with Zoja is, of course, making sure that it, A, makes narrative sense, B, tonally works for the story that we want to tell and isn't just a distraction or a detraction from the narrative, and then C, can we get the performer, right? Like in this case, Felicia Day, who, it's been, I think, no secret that there has been some questions about whether or not we could use her. I don't know all the details there, so I'm not going to claim to have any insights, other than I know that Felicia Day has become a fairly prominent celebrity, right? And when you're dealing with things at that level, you know, she's working all the time. She's got schedules, and she also is raising a family, right? So like, how do you make all of that work? It can be problematic on a number of levels, and so there's negotiations that have to take place. There's all kinds of, you know, stuff that I was behind the scenes that I have no context for. So it was always a thing of like, look, if we're gonna bring Zoja back, like we really want to make sure that it's the right moment for it, because there will be stuff to contend with. My argument for it was always that, you know, I think there was no better time to bring the character back because I had personal experience of this with Malik. That was an opportunity to bring back Malik in Heart of Thorns. We initially had Malik in the proposal, and we pulled that character out for a variety of reasons, and it never really landed right for us, I think, because that was a really prime opportunity to tell that character's story, and we ended up not doing it. And now it's like every time we talk about it, I mean, I'm sure there is, not to say that we will never find a place to put Malik as a character, but it will never quite, I think it will never quite feel as natural as had he been in Heart of Thorns, which was the expansion about Sylvari, right? It's so like, now that we're doing an expansion about magic, it makes sense to put this magical character in. And Zoja is a magical character, even though she is a Golemancer in the core experience of the game. She's an elementalist. She's a magician, right? Like, so she makes sense. So there was a lot of reasons why we came up with for bringing her back into the story, and I'm glad that we did. And then we can talk a little bit about Mabon as I run through, because when we talked about what characters we wanted to have in the Wizard's Court and the Astral Ward, we knew we wanted to have some races and characters that were not going to be what players were not going to expect. And who more would players not expect than a Mersat? Because everything that we've heard in the game is that Lazarus was the last Mersat, and we did face Lazarus and fight him in Season 3. Initially, we thought it was Lazarus, and it turned out to be Balthazar in disguise. But then we did go back and close that storyline out and fight the actual Lazarus and put him down. So, to all intents and purposes, within our lore, we were saying that that was it. Well, as often happens, people can claim to be whatever they want. That doesn't mean it's true, right? Like, Lazarus called himself the last Mersat. He wasn't. I think what we can say is, maybe according to Lazarus, he was the last true Mersat. He may not have liked Mabon or what Mabon stood for, because Mabon is a nice guy. He's a good character. Lazarus was not so much a good character. So I could absolutely see us saying, yeah, that's according, you know, I mean, I always pull this out, you know, I always have to make at least one Star Wars reference for any time I'm talking about storytelling, it seems, just because that was so central to my upbringing. But, you know, as Obi-Wan says in Return of the Jedi, you know, the things that we come to learn can be true based on a certain point of view. And that's so true, right? Like, our framing of events is crucial to our understanding of them. How we define something can be very different for one person versus another person. I mean, we see that all the time. We're seeing that today in the news. Whether you're looking at politics or religion or war or whatever, right? Like, the different perspectives are going to color how you see events. And big T truth is sometimes harder to understand than we think. It's easy for us to say, no, that's true. This is just a fact. Yes, but is that true, right? So the fact that we created a race that says there was one last Mersat, well, maybe in his mind he is the last Mersat, but Mabon would have something to say about it. So we decided, yes, it's okay. We can, you know, we can do that. Now, there's always the question of, oh, that's a retcon, right? Like, there will be players who will pull that out. You're retconning history. Okay, I mean, again, that may be the opinion of some people, that when stories evolve, you feel slighted, like, you know, you were not being straight, and now you're adding to something that didn't need to be added to, or the like. My perspective on this tends to be, no, I think that's not always true, right? Like, I think there should always be room to expand on something. I mean, unless something is like, I mean, if you have video documented evidence of something being the case, it's hard. Yes, that's a fact, and you can't really dispute it, right? But if it's something that you heard or that somebody said, you know, there's always room for a slightly different interpretation, or for expanding on what was known at the time. So Mabon is a great character. Love that we introduced him. And then like, okay, that's enough talking about Mabon, I think, for now. Because again, I could probably go on and on about Mabon, but that's not the focus of this series, which is to talk about design in general, and not necessarily specifically character design. Though that may be a fun experiment sometime, to do some character design discussions. But I don't want to get too far behind where we are. So we're rolling through here now. This is a section that went through a lot of iteration as well, because after we finish taking out the enemies, we're going to introduce some new tech, or new tech. I always say new tech. It's not tech, it's magic, new magic to the player's repertoire, with the use of this new mastery to use the Heart of the Obscure to close Rift. So we'll take the Heart, which I can't even go into how big of a pain in the butt it was to set some of this stuff up so that she was doing this animation, because it's a skill, and yeah, we have to kind of fake NPCs using skills sometimes because reasons. So you take the heart from her, and now you can close this rift. But what I was going to say about this is, this section really goes into some of the I think the things that any narrative designer would consider, hopefully, best practices, which is you want to align player goals. So the best narrative design is one that aligns player goals with the player character's goals. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, I need to go forward, and so does the commander, right? Like, I don't want to be stopped here. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have to use the thingy. Oh wait, I don't have the skill unlocked yet. I do that every time. I forget that that's a thing you have to earn, because so much of the time in development we have all the things, and then I forget that, oh yeah, you have to earn all that stuff. You don't just get it for free by being a developer. I'm not a developer on my live account. I'm a regular player. So yeah, so I'm wanting to get through the hall. Commander needs to get through the hall. So that's an aligned goal, right? Like, we both want the same thing. We need to get point A to point B, and we use this doohickey, the Heart of the Obscure, to do it. So you hit F to seal the rift. It pulls the rift out, the heart out, and it does damage to the rift, and then it closes. And now we are moving forward together. So those are the sorts of things, and trying to also figure out how much you need to teach the player via hints, which we use, via dialogue. You know, you have to be pretty prescriptive in some cases, because, you know, now the Heart of the Obscure is an example of, I think they call this the Maya principle, which stands for most advanced yet acceptable, I think. I can't remember the exact terminology, but it's basically what it means is, the Maya principle stands for give players something new and fun and cool, but with enough familiarity that they are instantly like, oh yeah, I know how to do this, right? So like Heart of the Obscure is a new skill, it's a new capability, a new ability, but it really just uses either the F interact, which you already know how to use, or it uses a skill on the mastery skill bar. Cool, awesome, right? Those are things you know how to do because we've already taught them. So we don't have to teach you a whole lot. We just have to explain, hey, you're using this system that you already know how to use to access this new ability. And it may do other things. It may do neat things that you have not been able to do before, like closing a rift. Although we've done that in other content, I'm sure, but probably more mechanically, where it's just a literal F to interact, or you attack a rift and destroy it yourself. So that's the sort of thing that we have to do. Is we're, as game designers, we're teaching players as much as we're guiding, but you have to be really careful about how you go about teaching, because teaching can feel very heavy-handed, and we have to create opportunities for players instead, to give them ways to basically learn by doing, right? And so we give them some VO, a little bit of a hint. Like in this case, we were saying the hint was sometimes you have to clear out all the enemies before you can close the rift. That's a teaching moment, and it's doing it by just giving you things to fight, which you already know how to do. So we create an opportunity there, and the reason we do that is because when you get out of this building and out into the main courtyard, that's what you'll have to do. You'll have to clear out a bunch of enemies, kill them all, and then you can close the rift. So it's about teaching things and then reinforcing that by making you do them again and again until you get it. And that's a central thing that you need when you're doing rift hunting as a gameplay element in the open world. So that's what this is all about, right? This instance is, in effect, not just a chance to catch up on the story and the characters, but it's also teaching you some pretty core mechanics for the expansion. So it's serving a pretty important purpose in a lot of different ways. Which does inform things like difficulty. For example, I kept the enemy groupings in this instance to a minimum. You have a couple different kinds to fight. They're pretty, they're tanky. Well, I mean, tanky for my build. They might be getting cut through like warm butter by other builds, but in my case, they're pretty tanky. But I did that so that, again, you wouldn't necessarily be challenged by the combat here. It's not designed to be a challenge. This is not a combat challenge. It's not a skill challenge. It is I just need to learn the mechanics. I want to get it down. I kill the stuff. I seal the rift. That's it. And by doing it in this environment too, where it's a linear path through a building, there's really not a lot of places for you to deviate. That's what we call controlling the flow. So we can control the player, where they're going, what they're doing. That helps us really align those goals, as I was saying before, quite well. It creates brevity because you're just going from point A to point B. You don't have to like do a lot of side exploration, although you can. There's a few little cutouts where you can go in, and I think there's a couple books hidden throughout this building that you can find, but it's not a lot. I'm not trying to encourage you to do a lot of side exploration here, because I really want you to just get through and understand what you're doing. All right, so I'll exit this area, and we'll have one of my favorite parts of this chapter, which is the fly-through. I love cinematics. I love cinematic presentation. I would love to do this kind of stuff more in our game, but it's expensive to do, so we can't do a lot of it. But when we do it, I'm super happy when we are able to do it. This one I did in the style of, I don't know, maybe this is bad terminology, not in media res. Well, it's kind of related. But I really wanted to, so I'm a huge fan of David Fincher and other directors that put diegetic titles. One of my favorite game openings is the game Prey, because at one point you get in a shuttlecraft and you're flying from your apartment to your work. And as you're flying, the credits are in the background on buildings, and like they're in the world, and you know they're not there. Like that's just an artistic aesthetic touch. But I love that kind of thing. I love doing that. I wanted to do a little touch of that here by putting the logo in the sky. We did this similar thing in Ender Dragons as well. So it's not like the original, this is not an original take on this. But the difference between Ender Dragons and this one is I put this, I fought for this too, because we definitely got feedback that they wanted it to be more of a button moment. I wanted it to be, I wanted you to see the carnage, and I wanted you to see the logo while the NPCs were talking to you. I wanted it to be like, we're not stopping to show you, like this is chaos, this is carnage. I don't want you to necessarily, think of it as a beauty shot. It's not a beauty shot. It's a holy crap, what's going on? It's impact. This is the first moment I think where we have that real focus on impact. And so I wanted to put the title card there to say, now this is where everything starts, right? Like now it's the expansion doors are open, and welcome. Like here you go. It does, though, however, even though it's not a beauty shot in the traditional sense, it is the other reason I love working in this kind of environment and doing these cine events and, making camera do stuff that we normally don't do, is that it gives me a chance to showcase other people's work, right? Our amazing map artist, Jesse Christensen, who built this map. Our incredible visual effects artists who put this storm in the sky, and the people who built and painted the skybox. And the skybox is actually using new tech. I'm not even entirely sure how it's different, but I know it's a much more comprehensive treatment on how to make a skybox than we had before, which I think was just basically a cube with textures applied to it. So I think we've done more with the skybox, and so I just love the ability to of course, why would I not take the camera and put it up and frame this amazing vista of all the stuff that the artists have spent so much time crafting and building, and refining and iterating, like all of us have. So anytime I get a chance to showcase other team members' work, I love to take advantage of that. There were some downsides, though. So one of the things that was trouble, and again, kind of going back to what I was saying before about some people wanted it to be no, there's a music stinger, and we have to get the audio team involved, and we have to do other things to make this moment pop. And I was sort of I think ultimately it's somebody else's call. It's not mine. But what I wanted was what I mostly got, which is low key, definitely yes, let's focus on the logo. So you have to kind of push for things that are, maybe contentious. I honestly think the way that it was done in Ender Dragons was beautiful, but that was a different tone, right? It was a wonderful, beautiful vista where you saw Cantha in all its beauty. And there was gorgeous, vivid lighting and textures, and had the beautiful music and all of that, right? And this is a different vibe, right? So I think we made the right call in keeping it pretty low-key. So I think it's important to fight for that stuff. And the other thing is that we struggled with on that Cine event was the fact that sometimes you would think of the thing hey, we need the logo in the sky, right? I made that request, and it kind of languished for a while. And I kept thinking, well, when am I going to get the logo? When am I going to get the logo? I was using the Ender Dragons logo for so long that even like in some of our last renders, it was still saying End of Dragons. Sorry, my sun is getting in here and shining in my face. And so you also have to then push on making sure that stuff like that gets prioritized. And you do what you can, and sometimes it comes in at pretty close to the 11th hour. And that logo was definitely one of the things that it took a while to get. And so you sometimes have to do stuff like that, and and the last thing I'll say about this cinematic, because that was a thing that went through a lot of iteration and a lot of back and forth, and we pulled it out at one point, and then we put it back in, and then we talked about maybe doing it as a canned cinematic where we would like pre-record it and then play it that's how Vistas work a lot of the time, is they're a pre-recorded fly-through path, mostly so that you don't see players jumping around and doing all kinds of crazy shenanigans in the background, and you can enjoy the moment. But we decided not to do that here. But one of the things that was a challenge is from the very beginning, one of the things we had hoped for, and one of the reasons why we also pushed it, trying to get new skybox technology, is we were hoping that we would see the Wizard's Tower in the sky, just like you saw it in Garenhof, right? We always had the intention that once you came out of here, again, you're seeing Garenhof. It's like, well, of course, why wouldn't you see the Wizard Tower in the background? Except that because we're a 10-year-old game and our engine is what it is, we can't really change some fundamental aspects of it. The draw distance, which is how far things render in the world, the game world, the Wizard's Tower is far enough back that you really wouldn't see much, if any, of it at all. As you can see, like some of these more distant objects, they tend to be more silhouettes, because the clipping plane starts to haze them out. And even this tower, I think this tower is still part of Garenhof, that you can see this outline. So like you would never see the Wizard's Tower the way we wanted it to. And we talked about maybe we'll paint it in the skybox so that you can at least see something of it. Nothing that we tried worked, unfortunately, and so we ended up having to just focus on Garenhof, which is cool in and of itself. But that's a challenge. We have to sometimes work around the technical limitations of our engine. Okay, so we come over here.
Commander, hop on a sky scale. It's the fastest way up.
Sky scales and
we are now introducing players to the sky scale. At least introducing, I say introducing, but that's only if you've not earned your sky scale yet, or this is your first expansion. If you already have sky scale, you don't have to do some of this stuff. You just get a thing that says mount your sky scale. If you don't have sky scale unlocked, it will have you interact with one of these sky scales, and you'll get the rental version of the sky scale mount, which is a buff that gets put on you, and as long as you're in one of the secrets of the obscure maps, you will be able to top on a sky scale like you would normally. But then once you leave a secrets of the obscure map, that goes away, and you'll have to earn it like anybody else. And then that locks this also then, once you get into the open world, it pushes you towards the acquisition track for earning your sky scale out in the other areas. So, anyway, I'm not going to talk about sky scale trader Diane yet. I will talk about her in Chapter 3, which I'll do in the next episode. But, just spoilers, this is a digital representation of my wife. She graciously volunteered to have me duplicate her likeness in the game. So yeah, hi honey, I will talk to you later. Yes, so mount your sky scale. So now the challenge with this too is there's sort of two things that I want to talk about with this. One is I have no idea. I mean, I have some idea where players are in their sky scale journey because I can check whether or not you've unlocked it. That's at the basic level, but I don't know how much you know about using a sky scale, so then I have to do this. I have to put every tutorial we've ever done And then I had to write a bunch of new tutorials and hints that tell you, hey, this is what you do to fly. Awesome. And then when you are flying, oh, cool, you're hovering now. So I'll give you a hint about hovering. Awesome. And then I can close that. And then it says, oh, did you know that you have sky scale energy? So, right, like, I know this is probably remedial for players who've played our game a long time. But again, I don't know what you... all I know is whether you have it unlocked. I have no idea how much you've flown it. I have no idea if you know what you're doing or if you don't. So I have to assume that maybe you just need... and at the very least, it's a refresher, right? And then teach you the dash. Teach you wall clinging, which is a thing that is tough to track because although I'm wall clinging now, the hint doesn't go away because I actually don't know when you're done wall clinging. That's not a thing that our game has a hook into. I just know that, you know. And so I have to assume that you're going to click this hint away when you're done. So that's that. Yeah, so, you know, with this being the expansion that really is trying to push more players to get sky scale, we had stats that we knew how many players of ours had sky skills, and we were like, you know, we could definitely improve those numbers. And that's one of the reasons why when we had this setting in the air, you know, the aerial maps, it really wouldn't have made sense for us not to prioritize at least one of the flying mounts. We had talked about doing it for both Griffin and Skyscale, and I believe that there may be plans to still revisit that at some point. But at the very least, we knew, hey, Skyscale is, of the two, like, getting your Griffin is orders of magnitude easier than getting your Skyscale, in my opinion. Like, as somebody who has both on live, I definitely felt the challenge in getting the Skyscale way more. Not that either of them are particularly easy, right? The Griffin is a lot of work and it is an expense. But I do think the Skyscale was, you know, I mean, it's treated as the premium mount because it is a lot of work, a lot more work. Okay. And you know, to follow into that, it requires a lot of testing, right? So I have to test with various levels of mastery levels. I have to see, well, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have that? Do you have that? And test against all those permutations. Not an easy task, and it's certainly something that, you know, QA also has to go through, of, you know, setting and resetting their masteries, unlocking different tiers, and dealing with it that way. And then the other component of not necessarily knowing what you have or what your capability is, and this just really just goes back to player agency in general. I'm encouraging you to get on your sky scale because that's what we're trying to teach you, right? And I say, use the heart to close rifts while mounted on your sky scale. You don't have to. If you stand enough under, you can seal it from the ground. Just shoot your heart straight up. I don't mind that. You know, if players want to do that, by all means, do that. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that, right? So this is a case where, you know, sometimes a lot of best practice of narrative design is encouraging players to do the thing you want them to do, but letting them do what they want to do anyway, right? Like, in circumstances where it's not a big deal to let them. There may be times when it's not appropriate, where you really are just like, no, I need you to learn this mechanic, so I'm going to teach you to do it. I'm going to require you to do it. But this is now a case where, like, you've already done that. I did require you to use it that way to get through the hallways and close the rifts there. So you've already been required to do it twice, right? Why would I make you have to do it every other time? Because you're not going to be forced to do it in the open world, which is, again, that's a subtle way of teaching in a different way, of saying, yeah, you know what? just because you've been doing it this way in the instant doesn't mean you'll always be doing it this way. Right? Like when you're out in the open world, you may be on your mount, you may not be on your mount. That's totally up to you because it's the open world, and it's, you know, players have a little more freedom there, right, to be able to experiment and do other things. So encouraging, but not forcing. And then also, huge shout out to one of our design leads, Kirk Williford, who is the open world team lead, who is the one who developed this system for having Frode follow you on a sky scale. That's something that has been a really challenging proposition for us, is how to get NPCs to mount. Man, what a pain that was. And then we finally did it, but even though we have the ability to do it, it can be kind of a really big problem to make work. So he created this really amazing modular system that allows NPCs to just hop on a sky scale and follow you around. Like anything, it's not, it's not like a fully robust system. It's a design sort of workaround. And so because of that, Frode cannot fight on a sky scale. He can't use his engage skills. He can't, throw fireballs or do anything like that. He'll just follow you around. And then when you decide that you're getting into combat, he'll jump off and help you the old-fashioned way. Thanks, Frode. And my Jade Bot.
Time to do some real damage.
Out here is where we start to up the difficulty in terms of fighting Cryptus, because, well, A, you have more open space, and B, you don't have the same sort of narrative constraints around. This is going to be more like what you experience in the open world, where you're going to come across groups of enemies, you're going to fight them, they're going to be a different stuff. So this is our opportunity to kind of teach. This is how hard an average open world encounter can be. Because up until now we've been kind of, I won't say hand-holding so much, but we have definitely been, there's been some training wheels on you up until this point, and now we kind of take them off and let you experience. This is what the Cryptus are as enemies. And this build is particularly badly suited to fighting them, apparently, because I am not doing too well. I will say, even though I'm enjoying using my legendary greatsword, I'm better on this character with my traditional staff build, because the staff build I am so used to using.
I feel good.
And it has really great mobility.
Replenishing.
And shields. Who doesn't like shields? Yeah. Okay. We'll close this last rift. We'll head up to the platform, and then it will be pretty much wrapped up. This recording is going to be huge. One of the things that I don't know that is an easy thing to teach is how to do sort of the zigzagging of the sky scale mount, because it has limited verticality that it can achieve on each sort of boost. It can be tough to understand where you are and what you're doing at that point. I wish I had been able to figure out a better way to message that.
More of them? I feel good.
Looks like your friend earned us some unwanted attention.
All right, so now we get up here and we have another combat encounter. This is an actual combat encounter in that there's a wave of enemies that spawns, and then there's a champion that spawns out of it. We need all of our allies to engage in it, including Maban, who will show up at some point. It's the first sort of official Cryptus boss, at least that you face in the story. You may find one out in the open world, but for story, this is our first actual boss. Saris kind of he's definitely a boss, but he doesn't really count as a boss because it's not a boss encounter in the traditional sense, because you're not actually supposed to win that or even present much of a challenge to the bad guy. This encounter went through a number of changes as well, in that it used to be the case that you'd get up here and all the wizards were here, and Dagda and Iskarin and everybody was here, and then this champion was going to spawn, and at some point during that fight, that's when you would see the other wizards get corrupted by the Cryptus, and then they would flee, and there's supposed to be like a sin event where they like knocked everybody down and then retreated, and then that was sort of like your literal call to action of like, oh crap, I guess I failed. But for both narrative and game design reasons, we ended up changing this so that now it's just starts out with just you and your group, and then we add Lear once you get to the platform, and then halfway through the champion fight you get Maban, so that it's a graduated upstepping of characters. You're not simply overwhelmed, which is part of the confusion and concerns around having all the wizards up here. And then the other one was just we didn't have the bandwidth to have all the wizards on one platform doing all their magic spells all at once. It was asking way too much for an early chapter like this. So we ended up changing that to what it is now. And then the other thing is, as you see, this is a floating play space. Now, if you know anything about our game, you know that players have the ability to go on and off collision like this, like a floating platform, no problem. Enemies can't, nor can NPCs. So when you have a floating play space, you have to be really careful, because sometimes you may get kicked off and you may like, oh shoot, I got to glide down here. But the enemies can't follow you down here, right? And your allies can't help you down here. So like it's a dicey proposition. So that's one of the other reasons why we kept this. We constrained scope on this so that it would decrease the chances of you getting kicked off or thrown off or pushed off by skills or whatever. Because that was not a good situation.
She'll be all right, Blair.
All right, now we end up in the wrap up here,
the split is
which is all narrative. So we can probably call this the biggest challenge here from a narrative design perspective is just there was so much lore. Oh my gosh, there's so much lore.
Heard rumors.
We have all these new characters that you have to get to know. You have backstory that you got to get filled in, and you got exposition on what the heck is going on in this map. Why is everything in the sky? Why does it look like there's everything's been ripped up out of the ground? Who are these people? What do they care about? You got intros to new characters. You got catching up with old characters.
And how are you doing? Stabilizing?
You got to balance that, because the characters you care most about are probably Maban and Zoja, but Lear and Frode are kind of second, and Narcisse is like maybe in that group. But I will say I think we underutilized Narcisse. She's an interesting character, but she really didn't have a big role. So in hindsight, I could see us making a decision to have maybe cut her from this chapter and not had her here on the platform. I'm not sure. Anyway, But yeah, that's neither here nor there. Anyway, from here it's just a lot of talking. So I don't know that we need to click through, and because I won't have a whole lot to say about this from a design perspective.
I'm sure you have many questions for me.
I guess the only
Quite
thing
a
I will
few.
say that I think I was
You?
particularly happy
I'm a
with
sucker,
how
yes.
I implemented this.
I'm sure that isn't
This
the
is a thing
biggest
where
shock you've received today.
Wizards, the Astral
normally
Ward,
what we would have
traveling
done
to
is we would have
wherever it
had
is?
you talk to each
No,
of these
it's
NPCs. Once you've filled this
apologize if
bar
I
with
find
all
it
the
hard to trust you
dialogues that you've heard,
immediately.
then it would
My
progress
only
to the next step.
experiences
And
with
I
your sod have
and I
been-
really thought about
Dire
the
at
player
best,
experience
I
of
know.
that.
Ask whatever
And
you
given how
think.
much lore there was, I was like, no,
knowledge
that's asking way too much of
placed
your
a lot
average
of
player, even
faith in
our
us
diehard
already.
players, right? Like, so what I did is the very first dialogue you have with each of them counts for this bar. Everything else is purely optional, and you can click into it or you can leave it alone. And they will,
Socha,
you know,
it's been-
still have all those dialogues, so you
long
can
time.
still ask those questions later.
I'm sorry.
But to progress
It's been
the
an
story,
eventful day.
you really only need to
Suppose
hear
I'm still in
one
shock.
dialogue from each of the main character, the main
bet you are.
wizard characters,
It's good to see you.
and then have a brief exchange
And
with
you.
Frode,
We have a lot to catch
and then
up
that's
on.
it. And you can hopefully get through. So I'll show you what that looks like. So you can get
must be
through
the
the
commander
main
Mabon
line
spoke so
quickly if
highly
you want.
of.
Not,
I guess you're
I
about
mean,
what I
it's not
expected.
quick because you still have to sit
And
through
what did
the
you
3
expect?
dialogues, but
Couple more scars.
it's
Taller,
quicker
maybe.
than if you had to sit and listen to every conversation that Mabon has, because he has a
Monitor
lot, and
you
he
as
has,
we
each
monitor
of those
all
dialogues is
magical
fairly lengthy
anomalies.
because you're covering a lot of ground. There's
worry.
exposition, lore,
You're one of the good ones.
backstory, you know,
If
all
you
of it,
weren't-
character development.
Well, you'd be dead.
So there's a lot to cover in all of those.
I require your attention.
So yeah, as soon as you have talked to all 3 of them, Frode says, "Hey, come talk to me," and then these guys all change to
didn't make it
optionals.
Mabon focused all of his energy on grabbing the commander.
If she has half the strength of her mother, I pity the cryptist that tries to put her down.
This is a little bit of
Oh, yes.
foreshadowing
Glad to see you
for
on your
what
feet.
just shipped on Tuesday
too.
with
I
QR1,
suppose we
quarterly
finally have
release
a
1,
breath for a proper introduction.
where we get to meet
Name's
Arena
Frode.
and see
Welcome
what
to
she's
the
been up
Astral
to in
Ward.
Nyos, because she does survive. And so if I mainline Frode, we'll have
Now
a
that
brief
you've got some
conversation
sense
that
of our
sets up the call to
situation,
action
I've set
for
up
our
a meet
next
with the rest of the Rift Hunters.
chapter.
Hunters.
And
Are
then
they
everything
also
else is
Astral
just
Ward?
icing on the cake. You
Correct.
get to know the characters,
I'll
get to know
explain later.
more about the
Got a
story,
camp set up
learn
nearby. I'll walk
extra
you through
details about
everything.
Mabon that
Got
you
it.
might not
I'll see you
have
there soon.
known otherwise. So that is the first 3 chapters, because it's prologue, chapter 1, and chapter 2 of Secrets of the Obscure. So I hope that gave you some insight. This is, again, I apologize for the length. I mean, I don't apologize for the length, but because that was the intent, is these are supposed to be longer so that you have hopefully a better picture of what goes into making this stuff, and get a little more deep on the narrative and the design of what these story chapters are. So hopefully you all found some value in this, and I really enjoyed doing this series, so I will continue on soon with the next episode, which will probably cover chapters 3 and 4, I would think, because those are both primarily open world chapters. Although there's some instances in chapter 3, so I don't know. We'll see. I always say that, but then every time I've played chapter 3 since where I didn't have access to cheat commands to like move the bar along, I have found that it probably takes longer than I think it is. So we'll see how it goes in chapter 3. But chapter 3 being mostly open world, I may not have a lot to say about the design work on that either, because I was not directly involved in designing that content. I was just responsible for connecting to it and building ties, which has its own interesting stories, but maybe not enough to be its own episode. So we'll see. But either way, I will touch base with you next time, and I look forward to seeing you again out there on YouTube. If you do find appreciation for this, feel free to like and subscribe to my channel. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Great. Thank you. Bye.